Her ex took everything in the divorce, but forgot the old granary her father hid in the deed. What he didn't know was that the small, stone building held a secret that would unravel his entire empire. If you've ever felt like you've lost it all, only to find a hidden strength you never knew you had, hit that subscribe button. This story is for you. The last box was taped. It was a small, sad-looking box, barely worthy of the brown packing tape I'd used to seal its flaps. It contained the final remnants of a life I no longer recognized as my own. A chipped coffee mug with a fading picture of a lighthouse, a handful of paperbacks with cracked spines, and a framed photo of my father and me, taken on a fishing trip when I was 10. His arm was around my shoulder, his smile quiet and genuine. My own was a toothy, unrestrained grin. I hadn't smiled like that in years. Julian used to say my smile was too wide, that it crinkled the corners of my eyes unattractively. I'd learned to smile with my mouth closed. The apartment was brutally empty. Every echo was a ghost. Julian's ghost, our ghost. He hadn't just taken the furniture, the art, the savings account. He had taken the very air out of the rooms, leaving behind a vacuum that sucked at my lungs. He'd called it a clean break. It felt more like an amputation. He was the surgeon, and I was the limb he'd decided was no longer useful. The settlement papers had been a masterclass in legal evisceration. His lawyers, sharp men in sharper suits, had carved me out of our shared history with the precision of diamond cutters, leaving me with my maiden name, a 10-year-old sedan, and this one last box of memories they deemed worthless. They were probably right. I ran a hand over the smooth, cool surface of the photograph's glass. My father had been gone for 5 years, a quiet heart attack stealing him away before he ever had the chance to meet Julian. At the time, I'd mourned the fact they'd never known each other. Now, a bitter, shameful relief curled in my gut. My father, a man who could read the weather in the bend of a willow tree and the truth in a person's eyes, would have seen right through Julian. He would have seen the rot under the polish. And I, blinded by the shine, wouldn't have listened. That was the part that hurt the most. A final sweep of the barren living room confirmed it. Nothing left. It was time to go. My destination was a cheap motel on the edge of the city, a place to exist for a few days while I figured out what came after rock bottom. My hand was on the doorknob when the buzz of the intercom startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. My friends had slowly been edited out of my life by Julian, one by one, their invitations dismissed, their calls unanswered until they simply stopped trying. Yes, I said into the speaker, my voice raspy. Package for Alara Vance, a muffled voice replied. Signature required. I buzzed him in, my mind racing. A package? Julian wouldn't be sending anything. His brand of cruelty was in the clean, silent removal of things, not in follow-up correspondence. The courier was a young man with a bored expression who handed me a stiff, oversized envelope and a stylus. I scrawled a shaky signature on his screen, took the envelope, and closed the door, leaning against it. It was from Abernathy, Cole, and Finch, the law firm that had handled my father's estate. The name felt like a relic from another lifetime. Mr. Abernathy had been my father's lawyer for 30 years, a man as steady and weathered as the oak trees that lined our old property. The envelope was thick, heavy with the kind of paper that signifies importance. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a letter, clipped to a sheaf of documents filled with dense legal language. I read the letter first. Mr. Abernathy's voice, calm and pragmatic, seemed to emanate from the crisp, typed words. Dear Alara, I trust this letter finds you well. I am writing to you regarding a matter pertaining to your father's estate. It has come to my attention, during a routine archival review, that a specific codicil to his final will and testament was not fully executed following his passing. I offer my sincerest apologies for this oversight. The fault is entirely mine. The document was filed separately from the main probate materials and was regrettably missed. The codicil concerns a small, detached property located at the northwestern edge of the original Vance family estate. Specifically, the old stone granary and the 15 acres of land upon which it sits. Your father, in his foresight, had this parcel legally severed from the main property deed years before his death and placed it in a blind trust under your name, to be transferred to your full ownership upon your 25th birthday or in the event of what he termed a significant life alteration. The words swam before my eyes. The granary. I could see it in my mind. A solid, two-story structure of fieldstone and heavy timbers, its slate roof green with moss, tucked away behind a stand of ancient maples. As a child, I'd imagined it was a castle. As a teenager, I'd ignored it. Julian had never even seen it. When we'd visited my father a few times before he passed, Julian had stayed in the main house, complaining about the lack of cell service and the smell of damp earth. He'd had no interest in exploring the grounds. The grounds he had later, through his corporate connections, arranged to be sold to a luxury development company for a fraction of their worth after the estate was settled. I had signed the papers, numb with grief and trusting his judgment. I continued reading the letter. The transfer of ownership was meant to be automatic, but the administrative failure on my part prevented it. Given your recent divorce, which I was sorry to hear about, the conditions of the trust have been met. The enclosed documents finalize the deed transfer into your name. The property, legally designated as Lot 7B, is, and has always been, yours. Also enclosed is a key. Your father left it in my care for you. I looked back in the envelope. There it was. A heavy, old-fashioned iron key, pitted with age, attached to a simple leather fob. It felt impossibly solid in my hand, a small, cold anchor in the swirling chaos of my life. The Granary, a place I hadn't thought about in a decade. A place that Julian, in his meticulous financial accounting of my life and assets, had never even known existed. It was a footnote on a forgotten page of a deed he'd probably glanced at once before flipping it to his lawyers. It was worthless, a pile of old stones on an overgrown patch of land. And it was mine. It was the only thing in the world that was mine. The decision wasn't even a conscious one. It was a pull, a magnetic force deep in my bones. I wasn't going to a motel. I was going home. Or, at least, to the one small piece of it that was left. I picked up the single, sad box, grabbed my purse and the car keys, and walked out of the empty apartment without looking back. The door clicked shut behind me, a final, definitive sound. The drive was 6 hours, a long, straight shot west, away from the coastal city and into the rolling hills and farmland of my childhood. The sleek, modern architecture of Julian's world slowly gave way to clapboard houses with wide front porches and barns with faded advertisements painted on their sides. The sky widened. The air grew thick with the smell of hay and rain. With each mile, the tension in my shoulders eased, replaced by a different kind of ache, a deep, resonant grief for the man my father was, and for the daughter I had failed to be. He had tried to warn me about Julian, not with words, but with silences. With the way his eyes would linger on me when Julian wasn't looking, a question in their depths I had refused to see. He'd asked once, "Does he make you feel bigger, Ellie, or smaller?" I had laughed it off, called him an old worrier. Julian was successful, ambitious. He was taking me to a bigger world, a better life. I hadn't realized he was just putting me in a smaller cage. My father had seen it, and he had built me an escape hatch, a crumbling stone granary on a forgotten patch of land. It was the most elaborate, heartbreaking, I told you so in history. I stopped for gas at a dusty station an hour outside my hometown. The man behind the counter was old and stooped, with kind eyes. He nodded at me. "You're not from around here." "I used to be," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. "I grew up near here. The old Vance place." His eyes lit with recognition, then clouded with something else. "Ah, yes. Shame what they're doing to it. Tearing up all that good land for a bunch of cookie-cutter houses. Your father, he loved that land." "I know," I whispered. The development was called Maple Creek Estates. The irony was a physical blow. They had named their soulless subdivision after the very creek they were likely poisoning with construction runoff. The entrance was marked by a grand, ridiculous sign featuring a smiling, generic family. I drove past it, my stomach churning, and turned onto the old dirt access road that ran along the back of the property. The road was overgrown, branches scraping against the sides of my car. And then I saw it. Through the trees, the granary stood exactly as I remembered, only more weathered, more consumed by the landscape. Ivy crept up its stone walls like a web of green veins. The slate roof sagged in one corner, but it was mostly intact. It was surrounded by a thicket of wild rose and tangled brush, a fortress of nature reclaiming its own. Beyond it, I could hear the distant growl of an excavator, the mechanical heartbeat of the development that had devoured the rest of my home. But here, in this small pocket, it was quiet. The air was still. I parked the car, the engine ticking as it cooled. For a long time, I just sat there, looking at it. It wasn't a castle. It was a ruin. But it was my ruin. I took the iron key from my pocket. Its weight was a comfort. I got out of the car, my city shoes sinking into the soft earth. I pushed my way through the overgrown path, thorns catching at my jeans. The main door was made of thick, heavy oak, bleached gray by the sun and rain. A massive, rusted padlock hung from the hasp, but it was unlocked. It seemed the developers hadn't even bothered to secure it, so sure of its worthlessness. The Rayal lock was the one the key in my hand was for. It slid into the keyhole with a gritty, metallic scrape. I turned it. The mechanism inside groaned, then clicked with a satisfying finality. I pulled the heavy door open. The smell hit me first. It was the smell of my childhood, of my father's workshop, of the earth itself. Damp stone, old wood, dry dust, and the faint, sweet scent of decaying hay. Light filtered in through a single, grimy window high on the opposite wall, illuminating a swirling galaxy of dust motes. The ground floor was one large, open space. Empty, except for a few rotting sacks in a corner and an old wooden workbench pushed against the far wall. It was the workbench that drew me. It was my father's. I ran my hand over its surface, scarred with 1,000 cuts and nicks from his projects. He had built me a birdhouse on this bench, patiently guiding my clumsy hands. My eyes adjusted to the dim light. I saw it then. Sitting right in the middle of the workbench, as if it had been placed there yesterday, was a wooden box. It was a simple pine chest, about 2 feet long, with a hinged lid and a small brass latch. On the lid, burned into the wood in my father's neat, careful script, was my name. Alara. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was more than just a key. This was a message. He had left this for me. My fingers trembled as I reached for the latch. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cheesecloth, were stacks of letters, tied in bundles with twine. And beneath them, several thick, legal-looking folders. I lifted out the first bundle of letters. The top one had a date on it from just over 8 years ago, a few months after I had announced my engagement to Julian. I sat down on the dusty floor, leaned my back against the cold stone wall, and began to read. My dearest Ellie, if you are reading this, it means 2 things. First, that Mr. Abernathy's filing system is as chaotic as I always suspected, and he has finally found this codicil. And second, that you have come here, to this place. I hope you are not here because of me, but for you. I hope you have come here because you need a place to stand, a piece of solid ground in a world that has tried to sweep you away. I am writing this first letter on the porch, watching the fireflies rise from the creek bed. You always loved the fireflies. You called them dancing stars. I am thinking about your engagement. You sound happy, truly happy, and for that, I am grateful. Julian is a successful man. He is polished and charming and says all the right things. I see how he looks at you, and it is with a kind of ownership that frightens me. Perhaps I am just a foolish old man, protective of his only daughter, but I have seen men like him before. They build beautiful, gilded cages. I cannot tell you not to marry him. You are a woman grown, and you must make your own choices, your own mistakes. It is the only way we learn. But I can do this. I can give you a key, not just to this old pile of stones, but to a choice. I have legally severed this granary and its small plot of land from the rest of the estate. It is yours, held in trust, invisible to the world until you need it. A place he cannot touch. A place he cannot even fathom wanting. Men like Julian see value only in things that can be bought and sold, leveraged and developed. They do not see the value in roots, in stone, in memory. That is their weakness, and I pray it will be your strength. Tears streamed down my face, dripping onto the brittle paper. I cried for my father's love, so quiet and so vast. I cried for my own willful blindness, for the years I had wasted, convincing myself that the cage was a castle. I cried for the lonely nights he must have spent, writing these letters, planning for a future he hoped would never come to pass. I picked up the next letter, and the next. They were a chronicle of his quiet observations, his growing fears. A letter from 6 years ago. Julian visited today. He spent the afternoon on his phone, pacing the length of the living room, talking about market shares and hostile takeovers. He asked me about the property value, about the zoning laws. He didn't ask about the soil, or the age of the oaks, or the family of hawks that nests in the north pasture. He looks at this home, our home, and sees only a balance sheet. A letter from 5.5 years ago, shortly before he died. Ellie, you sound tired on the phone. Your voice is smaller than it used to be. You tell me you are busy, that your new life is demanding. I hope it is also fulfilling. I hope you are not just an asset in his portfolio. I have been going through my old files. Legal papers, deeds, correspondence. It is amazing what a man accumulates in a lifetime. I am organizing them, just in case. I have put the most important ones in the box for you. Knowledge is its own kind of fortress. The final letter was short, the handwriting shakier. It was dated a week before his heart attack. My Ellie girl, my dancing star, whatever happens, know that this was never about a lack of faith in you, but an abundance of love for you. This granary is not an inheritance of property. It is an inheritance of possibility, a place to begin again. Your mother and I built our lives on this land. Now, a piece of it is yours to do with as you will. Be strong. Be brave. Be the woman I always knew you were. All my love, Dad. I sat there for what felt like hours, the letters spread around me, the dust motes dancing in the fading light. The grief was a physical weight, pressing down on me, but underneath it, something else was stirring. A slow, hot burn of anger. Not just at Julian, but at the system that enabled him, the corporate greed that saw my home as nothing more than a teardown. My father had mentioned files. I turned my attention back to the box. Beneath where the letters had been were several thick manila folders. I opened the first one. It was labeled Blackwood Development Group, the name of the company that had bought the farm. Inside were photocopies of emails, financial statements, and geological surveys. I didn't understand all of it, but I understood enough. Julian, through a shell corporation, had been a silent partner in the deal. He had used his knowledge of the land, gleaned from my father, to fast-track the sale, ensuring the company bought it for a song by hiding a recent, favorable geological survey that showed the land was far more stable and valuable for development than they'd claimed in their official offer. He had defrauded his own father-in-law's estate. He had defrauded me. The second folder was labeled Deed History. It contained the original deed to the Vance property, going back to my great-grandfather. And with it, a series of signed affidavits from neighboring farmers, attesting to the historical boundaries and water rights associated with the land. My father had been building a case. He had been documenting the fraud from the very beginning. He hadn't just left me a refuge. He'd left me an arsenal. The full weight of it crashed down on me. This was so much bigger than a divorce settlement. This was about theft on a grand scale. This was about the deliberate destruction of my family's legacy by the man I had loved, the man I had trusted with my life. He hadn't just overlooked the granary because it was worthless. He had overlooked it because his greed had made him blind to anything that couldn't be immediately liquidated. He had underestimated my father, and he had underestimated me. For a moment, panic seized me. Blackwood Development was a massive corporation. Julian was wealthy, connected, and utterly ruthless. What could I, a woman with a beat-up car and a single box of belongings, possibly do against them? They would crush me. They would bury me in legal fees, dismiss me as a bitter ex-wife, and this evidence, this truth, would disappear forever. The temptation to simply stay here, to fix up this small stone house and live quietly, was immense. To take the small victory my father had given me and let the rest go. It would be safer. It would be easier. I looked around the dusty, silent granary. The fading light cast long shadows from the heavy wooden beams overhead. This place was built to last. It was made of stone pulled from the very earth it stood on, timbers hewn from the forest that surrounded it. It had withstood a century of storms. It was a testament to my father's character, quiet, solid, and stronger than anyone knew. He hadn't done all this, spent the last years of his life meticulously building this case, just for me to hide. He had given me a choice, yes, but the letters, the files, the sheer, painstaking effort of it all, it was a call to action. It was a plea. Be brave. A cold resolve settled over me, displacing the fear. It wasn't just about the money or the land anymore. It was about justice. It was about honor. It was about reclaiming not just a piece of property, but a piece of myself. The part of me that had been silenced, made small, and told to smile without crinkling my eyes. That part was done being quiet. I want to pause here for a second, because maybe you've had a moment like this in your own life. A moment where you're faced with a choice, the easy path of silence, or the hard, terrifying path of speaking your truth. A moment where you feel completely alone, armed with nothing but a conviction that what happened was wrong. If you're nodding your head right now, if this is hitting you in a place you don't talk about often, I want you to know you're not alone. This community, right here, is built on people who understand that fight. So take a deep breath, and let's get back to the story, because what happened next showed me that sometimes the smallest key can unlock the biggest door. The first call I made was to Mr. Abernathy. I used my cell, wandering outside the granary until I found a single, wavering bar of service. It was late, well past office hours, but I tried his number anyway. He answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. Abernathy. Mr. Abernathy, it's Alara Vance. There was a pause. Alara, my goodness. Is everything all right? I'm at the granary, I said, my voice shaking slightly. I found the box. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. It wasn't confusion, it was something else. A deep, weary understanding. Ah, he said, the single word heavy with meaning. He told me he was putting a few things aside for you. He called it his insurance policy. It's more than a few things, Mr. Abernathy. It's evidence. Evidence that Julian and Blackwood Development committed fraud when they bought my family's land. I could hear him sit up, the rustle of sheets in the background. Alara, you need to be very careful. These are serious allegations. Julian and his associates are not people to be trifled with. I know, I said, my grip tightening on the phone. My father knew. That's why he did all this. He built a case. He has emails, financial records, the suppressed survey. He has everything. Bring it to my office, he said, his voice now sharp, fully awake. First thing in the morning. Do not talk to anyone else about this. Do not email anyone. Bring the physical copies. Can you be here by 9? Yes, I said. I'll be there. I spent the night in my car, parked beside the granary. I couldn't bring myself to leave. I locked the doors, the precious box of evidence on the passenger seat beside me. Sleep was impossible. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sounded like a threat. I kept thinking about Julian's face, the smooth, confident mask he wore. How many times had he lied to me with that face? How much of our life together had been a transaction for him? The anger was a clean, hot flame now, burning away the last of the grief and fear. It was fuel. The next morning, I drove the 2 hours to Mr. Abernathy's office in the county seat. His firm was in a historic brick building on the town square. It was the kind of place that smelled of old books and floor wax. Mr. Abernathy was older than I remembered, his hair completely white, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent behind his reading glasses. He led me into a conference room lined with law books from floor to ceiling. I laid the folders out on the long, polished table. For the next 3 hours, we went through every single piece of paper. Mr. Abernathy read in silence, his expression growing grimmer with each page. He would occasionally let out a low whistle or murmur. Clever man, your father. Very clever. When he was finally done, he took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He looked at me, his gaze direct and serious. This is comprehensive. Your father has gift-wrapped a federal case for the district attorney. Wire fraud, conspiracy, insider trading, it's all here. Julian used a series of nested LLCs to hide his involvement with Blackwood, but your father found the thread and pulled it. So what do we do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. We have 2 options, he said, leaning back in his chair. Option 1, we go public. We take this to the authorities, to the press. It will be a massive, ugly, and very public fight. Julian and Blackwood will throw an army of lawyers at us. They will try to discredit you, to paint you as a scorned woman seeking revenge. It will consume your life for the next several years. We might win. We might not. My heart sank. The thought of that kind of public battle was terrifying. And option 2? I asked. A slow, thin smile spread across Mr. Abernathy's face. Option 2 is more elegant. We don't go to the authorities. We go to them. We present them with a single, undeniable piece of this evidence, say, the suppressed geological survey, and we make them an offer. They void the original sale of the Vance property, returning the full deed to you, free, and clear. They will also pay a substantial settlement for damages and sign a non-disclosure agreement, so airtight, it would make a submarine jealous. In exchange, the rest of this evidence stays right here, in this room. It's blackmail, I said, shocked. It's leverage, he corrected gently. Your father didn't gather this information for revenge, Alara. He gathered it to give you power. The power to reclaim what is yours. A public trial would punish them, yes, but it would also punish you. This way you win. Quietly, but completely. They lose the land, they lose a lot of money, and they live in fear forever that the rest of this evidence might one day see the light of day. For a man like Julian, that is a fate worse than prison. I thought about it. He was right. My father hadn't wanted a spectacle. He'd wanted to give me a foundation, a safe place to land. He wanted me to have my home back. Option 2. I said, my voice firm. Let's do option 2. Mr. Abernathy nodded, satisfied. I thought you might say that. I'll draft the letter. This is going to be a delicate dance, Alara. They will push back. They will threaten. You need to be prepared. I am, I said. And for the first time in a long time, I actually believed it. The next few weeks were a tense waiting game. Mr. Abernathy sent the initial letter to Blackwood's legal counsel. Their response was predictable, a dismissive, threatening letter accusing me of extortion and threatening a countersuit. Mr. Abernathy simply replied with a single, scanned page, the signature page of the Shell Corporation's founding documents, with Julian's unmistakable signature clearly visible. After that, the tone changed. The calls became more frequent, more frantic. They wanted a meeting. Julian called me directly for the first time since the divorce. His voice was a strange mix of his old, charming self and a new, barely concealed panic. Ellie, baby, what is this? I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is just business. You don't understand these things. Let's just talk, you and me. There's nothing to talk about, Julian, I said, my voice cold and steady. You can speak to my lawyer. I hung up before he could reply. The satisfaction was a warm, glowing coal in my chest. I had taken back the power. He no longer had any control over me. While the lawyers danced their delicate dance, I moved into the granary. It was my home now. I bought a sleeping bag, a camp stove, and a few lanterns. The first week, I just cleaned. I swept out decades of dust and grime. I scrubbed the stone walls, washed the filthy windows. With every bit of dirt I removed, I felt like I was clearing away a part of my old life, making space for something new. The work was hard, physical, and deeply satisfying. I discovered the granary had a well with a hand pump outside. After a lot of rusty squealing, it produced clear, cold water. There was no electricity, but there was a large, stone fireplace on the ground floor that drew beautifully. My little ruin was slowly starting to feel like a home. One afternoon, an old pickup truck rumbled up the access road. An elderly man with a face like a road map and calloused hands got out. He introduced himself as George Peterson. He owned the neighboring farm. You must be Robert Vance's girl, he said, his voice a low rumble. I saw the light in here last night. Figured I'd come see you weren't a squatter. I'm Alara, I said, wiping my dusty hands on my jeans. It's mine now. He nodded, looking the place over. Your dad loved this old building. Said it had good bones. He'd be happy to see you here. He squinted at the sagging corner of the roof. Got some rot in those rafters. You'll want to fix that before the winter snows come. I know, I said, the task seeming insurmountable. I'm not sure how. I've got some spare timbers in my barn, he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And I know a thing or two about roofs. I'll come by Saturday. If you're willing to work, I'm willing to help. I was stunned. I can't pay you. He waved a dismissive hand. Your father helped me pull my tractor out of a ditch in the middle of a blizzard once. Never asked for a thing. We call that being a neighbor. See you Saturday. He got back in his truck and drove off, leaving me standing in a cloud of dust and disbelief. George was true to his word. That Saturday, he and his 2 grown sons showed up with timbers, tools, and a quiet competence that was awe-inspiring. They taught me how to measure, how to saw, how to secure the new rafters. They worked all day, refusing anything more than the sandwiches and lemonade I offered. By sunset, the roof was stable. That was just the beginning. Word seemed to get around the small community. The woman from the hardware store gave me a discount on nails and sealant. The local electrician stopped by and told me what it would take to run power to the building, offering to do the work for half his usual rate. It turned out my father, in his quiet, unassuming way, had built a legacy of goodwill. And now, I was the beneficiary. These people weren't just helping me fix a building. They were helping me rebuild my life. They were showing me what a real community felt like, something I'd never had in the transient, transactional world Julian and I had occupied. 3 months after I first put the key in the lock, the call came from Mr. Abernathy. "They've agreed to all our terms," he said, his voice calm, but I could hear the triumph underneath it. "The original sale is void. The deed to the entire 200 acres will be transferred to your name. The settlement funds will be wired to your account by the end of the week. It's over, Elara. You won." I hung up the phone and walked out of the granary. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the fields. My fields. My home. The distant sound of the excavators had long since gone silent. Blackwood Development had pulled out, their half-finished road to nowhere, a scar on the landscape that would eventually heal. I walked to the edge of the property, to the crest of the hill where my father's house had once stood. I could still see the outline of its foundation in the grass. I thought about the word inheritance. For most of my life, I had thought it meant money, property, things you were given when someone died. But I was wrong. My father's real inheritance wasn't this land. It was the love that had driven him to protect it for me. It was the quiet strength he had modeled, the resilience he had instilled in me without my even realizing it. It was the knowledge that a home isn't just 4 walls and a roof. It's a place where you are safe, where you are known, and where you have the freedom to be your truest self. Julian had tried to take everything from me, but he could never touch that. The granary behind me was no longer a ruin. It was a beginning. It had electricity now, and salvaged windows that gleamed in the last light of the day. Inside, there was a small wood stove, a comfortable bed, and a bookshelf I was slowly filling. It was small, and it was simple, but it was entirely mine, built not just of stone and wood, but of kindness and courage. Looking out over the rolling hills, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. The wide, toothy smile from that childhood photograph found its way back to my face. It felt a little rusty, a little strange, but it was real. I was no longer the small, quiet woman living in a gilded cage. I was my father's daughter. I was standing on my own ground, and I was finally, truly home. This journey taught me that sometimes the things we think are worthless, the forgotten properties, the overlooked memories, the quiet strengths inside us, are actually the most valuable assets we have. They're the keys that can unlock our freedom. My story had a happy ending, but it started from a place of complete loss. It started with a choice to fight for something that mattered, even when it seemed impossible. So I want to ask you, what's the old granary in your life? What's the hidden strength or forgotten piece of your own history that could be the key to your next chapter? Share your story in the comments below. I'll be reading them, because this channel is more than just a place for stories. It's a community for survivors, for fighters, for anyone who has ever had to start again from scratch. If that's you, make sure you subscribe and become a part of it. You are not alone in this.
Okay, I think we have most of the regular materials and stuff like that. Ta-da. Okay. Here we go. Let's go try and find Mewtwo, who is apparently here. Real fly, unnecessary shots taken at Dragonite. You're so right. I'm so sorry to Dragonite and the Dragonite community. My apologies. This is a interesting place. Oh my god, hi. Not the close-up foot shot. What is that? Who is that for? Excuse me, I'm gonna take this. Actually, I do like this pedestal, so we'll also take that. I find it interesting that he says Mew at the beginning, because, like, I know all the Pokemon say their names, right? But, like, you can talk. I'm interested at all. I'd like to talk with you more. Certainly. Wait, if we do this now... Okay, I'll have to come back and do that. All right, understood. Wait. Okay. So it looks like we have to mine this place for its resources first. And then we'll, oh, is he following me? That's unexpected. Also, thanks for the water reminder.